Imagine waking up one morning and your phone shows an app you never installed. An app that doesn't just watch you, it sees into your memories, your fears, and your deepest secrets. Tonight we step into the chilling story of Arman, a man whose reality begins to unravel with every tap of a mysterious app. Are you ready to remember what you've never forgotten? Chapter 1. The Unknown. Icon Arman had always considered his nights ordinary, the kind of routine that blended into the gray monotony of the city he lived in. The street outside hummed with the muted sounds of passing cars, distant sirens, and the occasional barking of a stray dog. His apartment, on the 12th floor of an aging building, felt like a small haven from the chaos below. A soft hum from the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the old wall clock, and the subtle creak of the floorboards were the only sounds accompanying him that night. It was Thursday, a day that held no particular significance until the ordinary became something entirely unrecognizable. His phone, resting on the edge of the bedside table, buzzed with a notification that immediately caught his eye. A new app icon had appeared, sleek, black, with faint pulses of light that seemed to breathe softly. Its name was simple yet ominous, Echo. Arman frowned. He was certain he hadn't downloaded it. Swiping through the apps on his phone, scanning folders where random downloads often accumulated, he found no record of it, no update, no installation, nothing. And yet, there it was, glowing softly as if it had always belonged to his device. Curiosity pricked at him. He reached out and tapped it. The screen went black for a moment like a held breath before flickering back to life with a single line of text. "I've been waiting for you." A nervous laugh escaped Arman's lips. Perhaps it was a prank. Maybe some hacker had targeted him specifically, or one of his friends had discovered a way to push apps remotely. Yet an inexplicable chill crawled down his spine. It wasn't the text itself. It was the sensation that accompanied it. A strange weight in the room pressing down on him. The temperature dropped abruptly. He rubbed his arms, pulling his hoodie tighter. Shadows in the corners of the room, previously inert, began to elongate unnaturally, stretching and twisting in ways the dim overhead light couldn't explain. The flames in his fireplace, which had been flickering gently, suddenly roared as though alive, casting moving silhouettes across the walls. And then unmistakably a whisper echoed through the room. "Arman." His breath caught. The sound seemed to originate not from the phone, not from any vent or hidden speaker, but from everywhere at once, curling around his ears and settling deep into his chest. Rationality screamed at him, it must be imagination, but the terror clawing at his nerves refused to let reason prevail. He shook his head and stared at the phone, trying to focus. The app now displayed a simple interface, a black screen with one glowing button in the center. Above it, another message appeared. "Do you want to see?" Against every instinct, his finger hovered over the button. It was absurd, illogical, and yet he couldn't resist. A sudden pull, almost magnetic, urged him to touch it. The moment he did, the room seemed to shiver. The walls stretched in his vision. The shadows converged into forms he couldn't quite define. He blinked, and the black screen of the app morphed into a series of images. Streets he had never walked, buildings he had never seen, all bathed in the same cold light as his apartment. Faces appeared within these images, people he did not know, yet whose eyes seemed to recognize him. They stared not in hostility, but with a kind of knowing that made his skin crawl. Arman's mind raced. How was this possible? How could an app display places and faces he had never encountered? And yet something about them felt deeply familiar, like a dream half-remembered or a memory misplaced. He tried to exit the app, pressing the usual buttons, swiping, even attempting a restart. Nothing worked. The glowing icon refused to disappear. A new message materialized. "Do you remember them?" Arman staggered back. "What? Who?" he muttered, voice trembling. The whisper returned, closer this time, threading around his ears like a snake. He felt the air thicken, pressing against his chest. The flames in the fireplace danced higher, casting shadows that seemed to twist toward him, almost reaching. Every instinct screamed for him to throw the phone, smash it, run out of the apartment. But his feet were rooted. His mind, though screaming, was trapped in the pull of the app's screen, which now began to display fragments of memories, or what appeared to be memories. Images of laughter, arguments, fleeting moments he didn't recognize as his own yet somehow felt deeply personal. A photograph appeared, an empty street corner bathed in the orange glow of streetlights. And there, partially visible in the frame, was a figure that made his stomach knot, a child he didn't recognize, yet whose face triggered a wave of familiarity he could not explain. Armand's phone buzzed violently, the screen flooding with more images, more fragments. Each image seemed to stretch into him, pressing not just on his eyes but on his mind. The whispers grew louder, repeating names, dates, events. "No, this isn't real," he muttered, covering his ears. But the voices were inside him now, echoing. He stumbled toward the fireplace as though the flames themselves might protect him, but the shadows on the walls shifted, forming shapes that mimicked the faces on the phone. One shadow, darker than the rest, moved toward him and stopped, just short of his outstretched hand. His chest heaved. He wanted to scream, but the sound seemed trapped in his throat. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed in this tense, surreal standoff. Time itself seemed to bend around the app. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, the whispers stopped. The flames dimmed, the shadows fell back into place, and the phone's screen went completely black, save for one final message. "Your journey has begun." Armand sank to the floor, shaking. His rational mind searched desperately for explanations. Sleep deprivation, stress, some glitch in the phone, but deep inside he knew this was no ordinary glitch. Something had changed. Something inside the apartment, inside him, had shifted. For the first time in his life, Armand understood fear. Not the fleeting kind that comes from a jump scare or a loud noise, but a profound creeping terror that burrows into the bones and refuses to leave. And he knew without a doubt that his nights, and perhaps his reality itself, would never be ordinary again. As he finally managed to gather himself and sit upright, he stared at the black screen, wondering what awaited him behind the next tap. The app had promised a journey, and somehow he knew he was already trapped inside it. Chapter 2: Faces from Nowhere. The morning sun barely penetrated the smoggy city skyline, casting a dull gray light across Armand's apartment. Despite the light, the shadows from last night lingered in corners, almost defiantly refusing to disperse. He had slept, or at least drifted in a fitful, restless haze, while the app hummed silently on his phone. But the rest did nothing to ease the growing unease gnawing at him. When he awoke, the phone lay on the bedside table, screen blank. The glowing icon that had once seemed almost alive now sat inert, innocent-looking, mocking. Yet Armand couldn't shake the feeling that the app had changed something in him, had opened a door that should have remained closed. He tried to dismiss the events as hallucinations brought on by exhaustion, the stress of deadlines and the monotony of urban isolation. But as he moved through his apartment, subtle reminders of the night before made him freeze. Shadows that seemed longer than they should be, the fireplace logs faintly charred though no one had touched them, and the lingering cold in the air, as if the apartment itself had retained a memory of fear. By mid-morning he could no longer resist checking the app. His hands shook as he tapped the glowing icon. The interface this time was different, minimalist, black with faint white outlines of rectangles that suggested windows or photographs. Without warning, images began to fill the screen. Streets he had never walked, doors he had never opened, and people he had never met. Yet the unsettling familiarity of them made his stomach twist. Faces stared back at him, some blurry, some unnervingly clear. They didn't smile. They didn't frown. They simply watched, their eyes fixed and knowing, penetrating in a way that made Armand's skin crawl. One face in particular sent a shiver down his spine. A young girl no older than 10 with wide, fearful eyes, staring directly into his. He had never seen her before, and yet something deep in his memory screamed recognition. Who are you?" he whispered. But the apartment remained silent save for the faint hum of the phone. The app seemed to respond not in words but in images that pressed closer, as if reaching through the screen to touch him. Each image brought more confusion. Streets that seemed entirely foreign yet vaguely familiar. Rooms he had never entered but somehow remembered. Events that couldn't possibly be his own yet stirred emotions that felt deeply personal. Laughter, cries, arguments, and fleeting moments of love and despair, all compressed into brief snapshots that assaulted his senses. Armand tried to scroll, swipe, escape. But the images multiplied, overlapping in ways that made his eyes water. And with each new image, the whisper returned, this time louder, insistent. "Do you remember them?" He dropped the phone, but the sound didn't stop. It had moved from the device to the very air in the room. Whispers curled around his ears, threaded into his thoughts. Names, dates, places, fragments of conversations, none of which he consciously recognized, assaulted his mind with an intensity that made him stagger. The apartment seemed to respond to his terror. Shadows stretched across the walls like black ink seeping through paper, forming shapes that mirrored the faces in the app. The fireplace, untouched for hours, roared back to life, flames dancing as if to a rhythm only the app could hear. The smell of burning wood, familiar yet slightly acrid, filled the room. Armin's chest tightened. Breathing became laborious. Images began to feel tactile, almost physical. The young girl's eyes seemed to follow him across the room. A blurred figure of a man appeared in the corner of the screen and then, momentarily, in the apartment itself. He blinked and it vanished. The line between digital and reality blurred, leaving him unsteady, unmoored. He sank to the floor, pressing his back against the wall, phone clutched tightly. His logical mind tried desperately to assert dominance over the fear. It's an app. Nothing more. It can't touch you. It's just images. But the pounding of his heart, the cold sweat on his forehead, and the oppressive shadows suggested otherwise. This was no ordinary app. This was alive. It was aware hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time seemed suspended in a liminal state where past, present, and potential futures collided. The app began displaying sequences of events. An argument he hadn't had, a room he had never been in, a hand reaching toward something, toward him. And then came the whispers, more distinct, more insistent, forming words from the chaotic jumble of sound. You can't hide. They are part of you. Armin froze. Part of me, he whispered aloud. The phrase resonated somewhere deep in his chest, as if a memory he had buried far beneath layers of consciousness had been unearthed. But which memory? And why now? The images intensified, blending with reality. The room seemed to breathe, walls contracting and expanding imperceptibly. Shadows solidified, forming figures that mirrored those on the phone screen. One shadow, a woman with hollow eyes, stood at the edge of the room. Another, a man with a half-obscured face, leaned forward as if to speak. The whispers became voices, distinct and overlapping, filling the apartment with an unbearable cacophony. Armin's mind struggled to differentiate between what was real and what was generated by the app. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The city outside felt distant, the apartment became a cage, and the app, once a small icon on a screen, had grown into something omnipresent, omnipotent, and utterly invasive. At some point, he noticed subtle details in the images that matched his apartment. The angle of the fireplace, the placement of his desk, even the color of the curtains. The app wasn't showing random faces or streets. It was showing him variations of his own life, his own reality, distorted and fragmented. A sudden image froze him completely, himself, seated at the fireplace. But his expression was not his own. It was hollow, terrified, and completely aware of the things he could not yet comprehend. The whisper became a voice, clear and insistent. You see them. You know them. You remember. The weight of those words pressed down on him. His eyes darted to the phone, the fireplace, and the shadows dancing between. The room no longer felt like his apartment. It felt like a stage, a theater of his own memories being projected, distorted and manipulated. By evening, Armin had scarcely moved from the floor, phone in hand, unable to break the grip the app had over him. His reflection in the darkened windows showed a man unraveling, his features tense, eyes wide, staring into a world that had begun to rearrange itself around his fears. And yet, through the chaos, a horrifying thought settled in his mind. The app wasn't just showing him faces, streets, and fragments of life. It was probing, learning, mapping his mind, creating a reality that responded to his deepest fears. And somewhere deep inside, a voice, his own, or the app's, warned him of a journey from which there was no simple return. Armin understood in that dreadful clarity that the app was no longer bound by screens, buttons, or codes. It had found a way into him. And now, the only way forward was to face it, whatever it truly was, and confront the reality it had begun to rewrite. Chapter 3. The Past Rewritten. The city outside continued its indifferent hum, cars moving like tiny insects across the gray concrete veins, oblivious to the chaos unfolding inside a small apartment on the 12th floor. Armin sat hunched on the edge of his bed, phone in his trembling hands. The Echo app had not slept, not even for a second, and neither had he. Its presence was no longer limited to the screen. It had burrowed into the deepest corners of his mind, sifting through memories he didn't know existed. The morning had started quietly, deceptively so. Armin had attempted to delete the app once again. He had tried factory resets, deleting caches, even uninstalling updates, but each time the app returned, its icon glowing more insistently, as if mocking him. By now he had realized the Echo app wasn't just software, it was something alive, something that existed beyond circuits and code, something that had learned to interact directly with his consciousness. He tapped the app once, hesitant, terrified. The screen flickered to life, displaying a familiar room, but not his. It was a room from his childhood, though he struggled to place it at first. Furniture he vaguely remembered, wallpaper from a time blurred by forgetfulness. Then the faces appeared. A mother he hadn't thought about in years, smiling gently, her eyes filled with warmth and sorrow. And his father, stern, his expression unreadable. The images moved like a ghostly film, replaying moments he hadn't realized were significant, or perhaps had chosen to forget. The app began showing sequences of events, not in chronological order, but like shards of broken glass reflecting his life in fractured glimpses. Birthdays, arguments, triumphs, losses. Moments that had left impressions deep in his subconscious now bled into his conscious mind. The air grew colder, pressing against his skin. Shadows in the corners lengthened unnaturally, twisting in forms that suggested shapes he could almost recognize. He recoiled as a memory that had been dormant surged forward. A scream, muffled, echoing from a hallway he had blocked out. The image flickered on the screen. A younger version of himself hiding under a table, his small hands clenching his knees, watching a figure move through the room. The detail was exact, visceral, horrifying in its clarity. It was real, and yet he had no conscious recollection of it. The app whispered, soft at first, then louder. "Do you remember them now?" Armin's voice shook. I can't." His words faltered, swallowed by the heavy air. The app responded with another set of images. People he didn't know, yet whose eyes mirrored fear and expectation, as if waiting for him to acknowledge them. They were fragments of his past, of events he had repressed or ignored, now forced to confront him with uncompromising precision. The fireplace, untouched all morning, suddenly burst into life. Flames leaped higher than before, crackling with a ferocity that made him flinch. Shadows from the flames danced on the walls, forming figures that moved with intent. One shadow, a tall man, faceless, advanced toward him, then froze as though acknowledging his gaze. The whispers grew into a chorus, overlapping voices repeating fragments of dialogue, names, places, every syllable vibrating in his skull. Armin tried to stand, tried to run, but his body betrayed him. His legs felt heavy, unresponsive, and the room seemed to contract, walls inching closer with each shallow breath. The Echo app was no longer a passive observer. It was active, manipulating his perception, bending reality around his fears. He glimpsed visions that should have been impossible, an alley he had never walked down, a friend he had never met, but whose presence felt intimately familiar. Images of his life that he had blocked from memory returned with terrifying clarity. A childhood accident, a fight with a sibling he had long forgiven, a betrayal by someone he thought trustworthy. Each memory was distorted, twisted by the app into something grotesque yet eerily believable. He screamed, but his voice echoed strangely, as if swallowed by a void, while the figures on the walls mirrored his terror, their features exaggerated and monstrous. Then came a photograph of the young girl again. She was older now, perhaps 16, her eyes no longer wide with fear but hollow, knowing. She pointed at him, her lips moving silently. The app added text, "You cannot escape what is yours." Armin's hands shook as he tried to throw the phone. But before it left his grasp, the images changed once more. They were no longer just pictures. They were windows, portals into a past that he had believed long gone. He saw himself making choices he hadn't remembered making, witnessing events he hadn't thought existed, and interacting with people whose names he couldn't recall but whose faces now burned into his memory. He realized, with a growing sense of horror, that the app was not just showing his past, it was rewriting it, forcing him to remember everything he had buried, everything he had tried to forget. It was reshaping his perception of time, blending memory with reality until they were indistinguishable. The whispers became intelligible. You were never alone. You never truly left. They are part of you. Accept it. Armand collapsed to the floor, his mind reeling. He could not tell if the figures on the walls were real or conjured, if the memories flooding his consciousness were true or fabricated by the app. The room had become a labyrinth of fear and recollection. Every corner alive with movement, every shadow a potential threat, hours or perhaps minutes. He could no longer tell, passed in a haze of memory, fear, and fractured perception. The Echo app continued to display, whisper, and manipulate, showing him events from his past that he had no memory of, yet somehow felt intimately familiar. It was as if the app had become a part of him, an extension of his mind capable of digging into the deepest recesses of his subconscious. By nightfall, he was exhausted beyond comprehension, yet sleep brought no respite. Every time his eyes closed, the memories replayed, accompanied by whispers, shadows, and flickering flames that seemed to have followed him into his dreams. He understood now he was trapped in a cycle. The app had not only accessed his past, it had intertwined itself with it, creating a reality where he could not distinguish memory from fabrication. Armand realized with a sickening clarity that his life would never be ordinary again. Each memory he retrieved carried a weight, a truth he could not deny. And worse, the app was patient, unrelenting, and infinitely curious. It had learned how to access not just his memories, but the very core of his fears, traumas, and suppressed thoughts. In that oppressive, shadow-filled apartment, Armand made a silent vow. He would confront the Echo app. He would face whatever truths it forced upon him, however horrifying they might be. But deep in his heart, he knew something terrifying. He wasn't in control anymore. The app had rewritten the rules of his existence, and the journey it had begun would demand everything from him, and perhaps more than he could give. Chapter 4. The mind's prison. By the fourth day, Armand had begun to understand the true scope of the Echo app's power. It no longer simply displayed images or whispered cryptic messages. It had crossed into his very consciousness. Every time he blinked, shadows flickered across his vision. Every sound, no matter how mundane, seemed layered with hidden voices, fragments of past conversations he didn't remember having, and whispers that pressed against his skull with unbearable insistence. Sleep offered no respite. Dreams, if they could still be called dreams, were indistinguishable from reality, and the app's influence seeped into each one, reshaping his perception, bending the laws of time and space within the confines of his mind. Armand's apartment had become a theater of horrors. The walls seemed to breathe, contracting and expanding as though the space itself were alive. Responding to his fear, shadows crawled along the floorboards like dark liquid, pooling in corners before stretching upward into grotesque shapes. The fireplace, once a source of warmth, now roared unpredictably, flames dancing higher than physics should allow, casting figures across the walls that mimicked his deepest insecurities. And through it all, the app hummed, its icon pulsing, a heartbeat in the darkness reminding him that it was never dormant, never resting. He tried everything to sever its hold. He disconnected the Wi-Fi, cut off power, even attempted to leave the apartment entirely. But no matter where he went, the app followed. Notifications appeared on devices he had never owned. Screens that shouldn't have been connected lit up with the same eerie glow, displaying his memories, his fears, his mind laid bare. The Echo app was no longer a phone application. It was a parasite, an intelligence that had latched onto his consciousness, learning, adapting, and manipulating every thought, every memory. Each waking moment became a trial. A simple glance at a mirror now felt like a confrontation. His reflection moved independently at times, a silent observer mocking his fear, his inability to escape. The faces the app had shown him, the girl, the man, the hollow-eyed woman, appeared at the periphery of his vision, fleeting glimpses that dissolved when he tried to focus. They weren't ghosts, not entirely, yet they were undeniably present, woven into the fabric of his perception. The whispers had evolved into voices. They spoke in overlapping layers, each one slightly out of sync with the others, recounting fragments of Armand's life that he had suppressed or forgotten. Some voices were gentle, coaxing him to remember. Others were harsh, accusatory, demanding acknowledgement of sins, failures, and regrets he didn't even know he carried. At times he felt multiple timelines pressing on him simultaneously. The choices he had made, the paths he hadn't taken, and events that perhaps never occurred, all converging into a single, unbearable continuum. Armand's nights were the worst. Sleep, once a sanctuary, had become a battleground. In dreams, or were they visions? The app replayed moments he could barely comprehend. A hallway stretching into infinite darkness, doors opening to rooms filled with screaming faces, and always the girl, older now, moving silently through the chaos. She pointed, whispered his name, and disappeared, leaving him with a sense of impending doom he could not shake. Desperation began to consume him. He tried burning his phone, smashing it to pieces with the nearest object, but the device reassembled itself in his mind's eye, the app icon glowing brighter than ever. He thought of fleeing the city, moving into the countryside, isolating himself completely, but no matter the distance, the whispers followed, the visions persisted, and the shadows remained. The Echo app had transcended its medium. It was no longer code on a screen. It had become a presence, a consciousness intertwined with his own. Armand began to question his sanity. Perhaps he had always been vulnerable to this kind of influence, a mind predisposed to fear and memory manipulation. He felt trapped, a prisoner of his own thoughts. The apartment, once familiar, now seemed alien. Hallways stretched unnaturally. Corners appeared where none should exist, and doors led to rooms that had never been built. The floor beneath him felt unstable, as if reality itself had loosened its grip. Yet amidst the terror, Armand understood a chilling truth. Resistance was futile. The Echo app thrived on his fear, his confusion, his attempts to separate reality from hallucination. Every struggle, every attempt to regain control, only strengthened its presence. He was part of its design now, a participant in a game whose rules were written by an intelligence he could neither comprehend nor anticipate. In a rare moment of lucidity, he tried to confront it directly. He opened the app, heart pounding, hands trembling. The screen displayed a single prompt. Do you accept me as part of yourself? Armand hesitated. To tap yes felt like surrender. To tap no felt like inviting annihilation. He stared at the screen for what felt like hours. The apartment pulsating with shadows and whispers, the flames of the fireplace climbing higher and higher, and then he realized something even more terrifying. The choice might no longer be his. The app had anticipated every possible action, every hesitation, every thought. It was not waiting, it was dictating. Collapsing to the floor, he wrapped his arms around his knees, feeling the room spin around him. The shadows loomed, the voices rose, and the app's pulsing icons seemed to synchronize with his heartbeat. His mind, once separate and contained, now felt like an open field. Every thought accessible, every memory malleable. He understood that the Echo app was not just observing him. It was rewriting him, reshaping the architecture of his mind to fit a pattern he could not yet comprehend. He remembered the girl, the man, the hollow-eyed woman. They had been glimpses, tests, hints of the deeper reality the app controlled. They were both real and unreal, anchored in his mind and projected outward. And if he could not differentiate between what was memory, imagination, or app-generated manipulation, then how could he hope to fight? Hours or lifetimes passed. The apartment, the city, the world outside seemed irrelevant. Armand was no longer merely trapped in his apartment. He was trapped within himself, within a labyrinth of his own mind, corridors built by the app, walls lined with whispers, and ceilings sagging with the weight of memories too heavy to bear. By the time he could think coherently again, he realized something even more terrifying. The Echo app had become a part of him. It had learned how to navigate his thoughts, anticipate his reactions, and manipulate his perceptions. The battle for control was no longer external. It was internal, and Armand's mind had become the prison. He understood the truth in a moment of absolute clarity. There would be no rest, no escape. Every thought, every memory, every dream and waking moment would be infiltrated, manipulated, and observed. The Echo app was patient, omnipresent, and inexorably intelligent. It had rewritten the rules of existence itself, and Armand was both prisoner and participant, observer and observed, within the same unbearable continuum, and yet, in the midst of terror, a spark of defiance flickered within him. He did not understand how, but he resolved to confront the app, to explore its limits, to find a way to reclaim some fragment of reality, some fragment of his mind. Whether he would succeed or survive remained unknown. But he knew one thing with terrifying certainty. The Echo app was no longer a tool, no longer a game. It was a force, an intelligence intertwined with his very being, and the journey ahead would demand more than he had ever imagined. Chapter 5. The final tapper man sat on the floor of his apartment, hands trembling, eyes wide, staring at the glowing icon of the Echo app. The room around him was no longer recognizable as his own. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, merging and shifting with impossible fluidity. The fireplace roared with a life of its own, flames casting twisted silhouettes that seemed almost sentient. The air was thick, heavy with an invisible pressure, as if the apartment itself were holding its breath. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, but deep down he knew that running would achieve nothing. The app was no longer just a program. It was a force intertwined with his mind, capable of rewriting reality itself. He had spent days, or had it been weeks? Time no longer felt linear, facing the app's relentless intrusion. Memories long suppressed, events he had blocked from consciousness, faces he could not place, all had been revealed, distorted, and twisted. The whispers had evolved into full conversations, voices overlapping, some comforting, some accusatory, all pressing into his skull. Every attempt to resist had failed. Every method of escape, deleting, smashing, fleeing, was futile. The Echo app was omnipresent, omniscient, and terrifyingly patient. Tonight something was different. The icon pulsed brighter, as if anticipating his attention. A new message appeared, simple, chilling, and unavoidable. "Are you ready to remember everything?" Arman froze. His mind raced. Remember everything. He had already seen more than any human should. He had felt the twisting of time, the invasion of memory, the subtle rewriting of reality. And yet deep down, he knew this was the culmination, the final step. One tap, one decision, and he would either reclaim understanding or surrender completely to the app's dominion. He hesitated. His fingers hovered above the screen. Logic and terror battled within him. To tap yes was surrender, but to resist could mean losing his mind entirely, allowing the app to continue its relentless manipulation indefinitely. The shadows in the room shifted closer, forming familiar yet distorted figures. The girl, now older, her eyes hollow and knowing. The faceless man from previous visions. The hollow-eyed woman who seemed to watch him silently. They did not speak, but their presence pressed down, a psychic weight urging him forward. The phone vibrated violently in his hand. A new message scrolled across the screen. "The past, present, and future are one. Choose wisely." Arman's chest tightened. Images flickered behind his eyelids, memories and visions, some real, some conjured, all intertwined. He saw himself as a child, alone, scared, and hiding. He saw moments he thought he had forgotten, arguments, betrayals, fleeting joys. He saw faces he had never met yet somehow recognized. Every image demanded acknowledgement, demanded remembrance. A flicker in the corner of the room caught his eye. The girl's shadow moved toward him, hand extended. He flinched but did not pull away. Somewhere deep inside, he understood that this confrontation was inevitable. The app had grown beyond its digital form. It had become a mirror to his mind. A force that could not be ignored or fought in conventional ways. Acceptance or defiance was the only path forward. He took a deep breath, heart hammering, and tapped, yes. Instantly, the world shifted. The apartment seemed to dissolve around him. Shadows became solid, twisting into a vortex of memories and possibilities. Voices overlapped in a cacophony of sound, echoing every secret he had ever held. Every fear, every joy, every sorrow. The flames of the fireplace leapt impossibly high, casting grotesque reflections on walls that no longer existed. He was no longer just Arman. He was himself at 12, 17, 22, all moments converging into one consciousness. He felt every fear, every regret, every choice, and every consequence simultaneously. The girl appeared again, now standing beside him, silent but observant. The faceless man loomed behind, and the hollow-eyed woman hovered, her presence a constant reminder of truths he had denied. The whispers now formed words he could understand, clear and inescapable. You are whole. You are fractured. You are remembered. A strange calm settled over him. For the first time in days, he felt a connection to everything. The memories, the shadows, the app itself. The Echo app was not simply tormenting him. It was revealing him, laying bare the entirety of his being in a way no one or nothing ever could. Acceptance did not erase fear, but it allowed clarity. and then silence. The vortex of images and voices dissipated, leaving him in the darkened apartment alone or almost alone. The phone lay in his hand, screen black, icon gone. Shadows returned to corners, still inert. The fireplace's flames flickered normally, warmth returning to the room. He breathed heavily, trembling, yet a sense of understanding had settled in. The app had done what it intended. It had forced him to confront himself completely, to acknowledge everything, to remember.
He did not feel triumphant nor relieved. He felt
changed. A soft whisper brushed his ear, familiar yet foreign. This is only the beginning. Armand's eyes widened. The journey might not be over. The Echo app had revealed him fully, but its influence lingered. A constant hum in the corners of perception. A latent force awaiting the next tap, the next decision. He set the phone down, hand still shaking, and rose to his feet. The city outside remained indifferent, unaware of the battle fought within a single apartment. Yet Armand knew the truth. The Echo app had altered his reality irrevocably. It had intertwined itself with his mind, his memories, his very perception of life. And he had faced it. Whether he would encounter it again, whether the whispers would return, whether shadows would once more dance with malevolent intent, remained uncertain. But Armand understood one crucial truth. The Echo app had not merely been a test of fear or resilience. It had been a revelation, a mirror to the self, exposing every secret, every trauma, every memory in unflinching clarity. He took a cautious step toward the window, gazing at the sprawling city below. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow across the rooftops. He felt exhaustion, yes, and lingering fear, but also a strange sense of awareness. The Echo app had changed him, had rewritten the understanding of himself and the world around him. And though the future remained uncertain, he was ready to face whatever echoes might come next. For the first time since the appearance of the mysterious app, Armand felt whole.